Have you ever wondered what happens when love defies the boundaries of power, duty, and society? What if the person you were forbidden to love was the one who held all the control over your life? Today, we're diving into a story that will take you on an emotional journey, a tale of forbidden love, hidden desires, and courage in the face of impossible odds. This isn't just any romance. It's a master-servant relationship turned upside down by feelings neither of them could have anticipated. Imagine living in a world where every move you make is dictated by rules. Rules set not just by society, but by the very person standing closest to you. It's a world where roles are rigid, hierarchies unbreakable, and yet love finds a way. In this video, we'll explore how two people from completely different walks of life found themselves entangled in emotions they never thought possible. You'll hear about the challenges they faced, the sacrifices they made, and the moments that changed everything forever. But here's the thing. This isn't just a story of passion. It's also a lesson in resilience, self-discovery, and breaking free from societal chains. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some loves are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And trust me, there's a twist you won't see coming. One that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty, honor, and true love. Why should you stick around until the end? Because this isn't just another predictable love story. We've dug deep into historical accounts, cultural norms, and even psychological insights to bring you something truly unique. Along the way, you'll uncover lesser-known facts about class dynamics, human behavior, and the timeless struggle between duty and desire. Whether you're here for the drama, the history, or simply because you believe in the power of love, this video has something for everyone. Before we get started, I want to welcome each and every one of you to our channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more stories like this. We specialize in bringing you gripping tales that blend fact with fiction, leaving you inspired, informed, and entertained. Now, let's step back in time, or perhaps into a realm not so different from our own, and discover how love can blossom even in the most unlikely places. Stay tuned. It's going to be a wild ride. Let's begin by stepping into a world that might feel familiar yet distant. A time when social class wasn't just a concept, but a rigid structure dictating every aspect of life. Picture this. Sprawling estates surrounded by lush gardens, cobblestone streets lined with horse-drawn carriages, and grand manors towering over modest cottages. This is the setting for our story, a place where wealth and power define not only opportunity, but identity itself. The year is 1850, in the heart of Victorian England, an era known for its strict adherence to tradition and decorum. Society at this time was divided sharply along lines of wealth and status. At the top were the aristocrats, landowners, nobles, and industrial magnates who controlled vast fortunes and wielded immense influence. Below them were merchants, tradespeople, and artisans, scraping together livelihoods through hard work. And then there were those at the very bottom, the servants, laborers, and peasants whose lives revolved around serving others. These divisions weren't merely economic. They were deeply ingrained in culture, law, and even morality. To step out of your assigned role was seen as dangerous, scandalous, and unthinkable. Now imagine being born into this world as a servant. Your fate is sealed before you take your first breath. You're destined to live in the shadows of greatness, invisible yet indispensable. For our protagonist, life began in a small village nestled deep within the countryside. Born to tenant farmers who struggled to make ends meet, their childhood was marked by hardship. Food was scarce, education non-existent, and dreams? Well, dreaming wasn't something encouraged when survival demanded all your energy. When they turned 16, circumstances forced them to leave home in search of work. Like countless others, they found themselves employed in one of these grand estates, a sprawling mansion owned by a wealthy landowner. Here, they became part of a silent army of servants tasked with maintaining the illusion of effortless luxury. Their days started before sunrise and ended long after sunset. From polishing silverware to scrubbing floors, preparing elaborate meals, or tending to guests' every whim. Their existence was defined by ceaseless toil. Every task carried weight, not because it mattered personally, but because failure meant punishment, or worse, dismissal without references, leaving them stranded in a world that offered no second chances. Despite the grueling routine, our protagonist harbored quiet strengths. Beneath their unassuming exterior lay resilience forged through years of adversity. They possessed sharp wit, keen observation skills, and an uncanny ability to anticipate needs, a trait honed from years of reading people's expressions and body language. Though often overlooked, they had a way of making themselves invaluable without drawing attention. It wasn't ambition driving them, it was survival. But beneath the surface, buried under layers of obedience and duty, burned a flicker of hope. A hope that someday, somehow, life might offer more than endless servitude. At the pinnacle of this hierarchical pyramid stood the master of the estate, a figure exuding authority and privilege. Imagine him now, tall, impeccably dressed, his presence commanding respect or fear wherever he went. His name carried weight in society. His word was law within these walls, and his decisions shaped the lives of everyone beneath him. Born into wealth, educated at prestigious institutions, and groomed for leadership since childhood, he embodied everything the servant could never aspire to be. Yet, despite his polished exterior, he too bore burdens unique to his station. Expectations weighed heavily on his shoulders. Expectations to uphold family legacy, expand wealth, and maintain appearances at all costs. Failure wasn't an option. Vulnerability wasn't permitted. The dynamic between master and servant was starkly clear. Servants existed to serve, not as individuals, but as extensions of their employer's will. Any deviation from this norm invited consequences ranging from verbal reprimands to outright dismissal. Conversations between them were formal, transactional, devoid of warmth or personal connection. Orders flowed downward, unquestioned and absolute. Respect was expected, not earned. And yet, amidst this rigid hierarchy, subtle nuances began to emerge. Perhaps a lingering glance during morning tea service, a momentary pause when issuing instructions, or an almost imperceptible softening of tone during rare interactions hinted at something deeper lurking beneath the surface that in this world, boundaries were sacrosanct. Crossing them risked not only personal ruin, but also societal upheaval. Love across class lines wasn't just frowned upon, it was forbidden. Marriages were arranged strategically, alliances formed to consolidate wealth and power. Romantic entanglements outside approved circles threatened the delicate balance holding society together. Rumors spread quickly, reputations crumbled overnight, and scandals became cautionary tales whispered in drawing rooms. Against such a backdrop, any hint of affection between a master and a servant would ignite outrage, betrayal, and potentially catastrophic fallout. And so, we find ourselves at the intersection of duty and desire, power and vulnerability, expectation and emotion. Our protagonist navigates this treacherous landscape day by day, performing their duties with precision while harboring secret aspirations. Meanwhile, the master wields his authority with practiced ease, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Neither can foresee how their paths will intertwine, nor the challenges that lie ahead. But one thing is certain. In a world built on rules, love has a way of rewriting the script. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, something subtle yet profound began to shift in the dynamic between the master and the servant. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a fleeting glance exchanged during a quiet moment, a brief pause before issuing an order, or a tone of voice that carried just a hint more warmth than usual. These small cracks in the rigid structure of their relationship didn't happen overnight. They emerged slowly, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Over time, these moments accumulated, creating tiny fissures in the wall of hierarchy that separated them. One such moment occurred on a rainy afternoon when the estate was unusually quiet. The master had spent hours poring over ledgers in his study, brow furrowed with concentration. The servant entered the room with a tray of tea, as they always did at this hour, careful not to disturb him. But today something felt different. As they set the tray down, the master looked up from his work, not with irritation, as he sometimes did when interrupted, but with genuine acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said softly, meeting their gaze for longer than necessary. It wasn't just politeness. There was gratitude in his voice, a recognition of effort beyond mere obligation. For the servant, this simple exchange was monumental. In all their years of service, no one in authority had ever truly seen them as anything other than a function, an invisible cog in the machinery of the household. But now, in this fleeting interaction, they felt noticed, not as a servant, but as a person. That night, lying awake in their cramped quarters, they replayed the moment in their mind, wondering if they'd imagined it. Had the master meant what they thought he meant? Or was it simply a trick of the light, a product of exhaustion-induced, wishful thinking? These kinds of moments became more frequent as time went on. There was the evening when the servant tripped while carrying a stack of books back to the library. Instead of scolding them, the master knelt beside them to help gather the scattered volumes, brushing off dust with his own hands. Then there was the morning when the servant noticed the master pacing restlessly in the garden, clearly troubled. Though protocol dictated silence, unless spoken to, they hesitated before offering gentle reassurance. Sometimes fresh air helps clear the mind. The master stopped mid-stride, surprised by their boldness, then gave a faint smile. "You're right," he murmured, resuming his walk with renewed purpose. Each of these instances chipped away at the barriers between them, blurring the lines of their roles. They weren't just master and servant anymore. They were two people navigating shared spaces, sharing glances, and occasionally sharing words that hinted at deeper understanding. Yet, despite these growing connections, both grappled with internal conflicts that threatened to pull them apart. For the servant, guilt weighed heavily on their conscience. How could they allow themselves to feel anything beyond duty towards someone so far above them? Love, or even affection, wasn't just forbidden, it was dangerous. If others discovered their feelings, the consequences would be catastrophic. Dismissal would be the least of their worries. Rumors could ruin their reputation, leaving them ostracized and destitute. And what about the master? Even if he reciprocated their emotions, which seemed increasingly possible, it wouldn't change the reality of their circumstances. He was bound by expectations far greater than any individual desire. Marrying a servant would bring shame upon his family name, jeopardize his standing in society, and unravel everything he'd worked so hard to achieve. The master, too, wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he prided himself on maintaining discipline and upholding tradition. His entire life had been shaped by rules designed to keep order and preserve privilege. Yet, here he was finding solace in conversations with someone who technically existed only to serve him. Was this weakness? Indulgence? Or was it something else entirely? Something human? Late at night, sitting alone in his study, he questioned whether he was betraying his responsibilities by allowing these feelings to take root. What kind of man was he becoming if he couldn't maintain the distance required by his station? Despite their doubts, neither could deny the magnetic pull drawing them closer together. It wasn't just physical proximity or convenience. It was something deeper, something rooted in mutual respect and vulnerability. For the servant, the master represented stability amidst chaos, someone who saw their worth even when society refused to acknowledge it. For the master, the servant offered authenticity in a world filled with pretense, a reminder of what it meant to live without artifice. Together, they formed an unspoken bond that transcended titles and expectations, but anticipation brewed alongside connection. Each meaningful moment brought exhilaration and dread. Would the next interaction reveal more about their true feelings, or would it expose them to judgment? Every word spoken, Every glance exchanged carried weight, building tension like a tightly wound spring ready to snap. Viewers watching this story unfold might find themselves holding their breath, waiting to see how far these two will go before societal pressures force them to retreat. Will they succumb to fear and retreat behind their respective roles? Or will they dare to embrace the connection blossoming between them? Consequences be damned. To heighten the suspense, consider the subtle signs of change in their behavior. The servant begins taking extra care with their appearance before heading to the master's quarters, smoothing out wrinkles in their uniform or ensuring their hair is neatly tucked away. The master starts lingering longer during meals, asking questions not out of obligation but curiosity. Questions about the servant's past, their dreams, their thoughts on matters unrelated to daily tasks. These shifts are small enough to escape notice from outsiders, but significant enough to signal transformation within. Meanwhile, external forces continue to loom large. Servants gossip below stairs, speculating about the unusual rapport between the two. Guests visiting the estate remark on the peculiar attentiveness of the staff, unaware of the undercurrents swirling beneath the surface. Society itself acts as both witness and adversary, its unyielding gaze pressuring them to conform. One misstep, one wrong move, and everything could crumble. Yet amid the uncertainty, hope flickers stubbornly. Perhaps love isn't meant to follow rules. Perhaps it exists precisely to challenge boundaries, to remind us of our shared humanity. For our characters, the journey ahead promises heartache and triumph, loss and discovery. Whatever happens, one thing remains certain. Once barriers begin to break, there's no turning back. Every story has a moment, a single event, that changes everything. For our master and servant, this turning point came unexpectedly, shattering the fragile equilibrium they'd been tiptoeing around for months. It wasn't planned, nor could it have been foreseen. Yet, when it happened, it forced them to confront not only their feelings, but also the reality of the world they lived in. This was the moment that would either drive them apart forever or bind them together in ways neither could have imagined. IT began on an ordinary evening. Though looking back, perhaps ordinary is too bland a word to describe what unfolded. The estate was hosting a grand dinner party, one of those elaborate affairs where every detail mattered, from the placement of silverware to the timing of each course. Servants scurried about like clockwork, ensuring perfection while guests mingled under crystal chandeliers. Amidst the chaos, the servant moved with practiced precision, balancing trays laden with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. Their role was clear: stay invisible, anticipate needs, and never draw attention. But fate had other plans. As the night wore on, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the east wing of the mansion, a result of a careless guest knocking over a candle during a heated conversation. Flames licked hungrily at the drapes, spreading quickly across the ornate wood paneling. Panic erupted as guests scrambled toward the exits, some screaming, others frozen in shock. Chaos reigned supreme, and in that moment, roles blurred beyond recognition. No longer were there masters and servants. There were only people fighting for survival. The servant sprang into action without hesitation. Years of navigating the labyrinthine halls of the estate paid off as they guided terrified guests to safety, shouting instructions above the din. But amidst the mayhem, their thoughts turned to the master. Where was he? Had he managed to escape? Meanwhile, the master found himself trapped in his study, separated from the rest of the household by smoke-filled corridors. He'd stayed behind to retrieve important documents, papers tied to his family's legacy, and now regretted his decision as flames crept closer. Coughing violently, he stumbled toward the door, only to find it blocked by fallen debris. Desperation clawed at him, but just as hope seemed lost, the servant appeared through the haze. "I thought I told you to get everyone out," the master barked, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. "And leave you here?" The servant shot back, their tone sharper than intended. "Not likely." What followed was a race against time. Working together, they pushed aside charred furniture and splintered would until finally the path cleared enough for them to make their escape. As they emerged into the cool night air, coughing and covered in soot, the weight of what had just transpired settled over them. Guests stood huddled nearby, murmuring prayers of gratitude, but the two figures remained isolated in their own private bubble. "You shouldn't have risked your life for me," the master said quietly, breaking the silence. His words carried both gratitude and guilt, a mixture of emotions swirling in his eyes. "Someone had to," the servant replied simply, avoiding his gaze. They didn't add that risking their life for him felt instinctual, almost natural, as if saving him meant saving themselves. In the days that followed, the aftermath of the fire lingered like a shadow over the estate. Repairs needed to be made, rumors quelled, and routines restored. Yet beneath the surface, something irrevocable had shifted between them. That night had stripped away pretense, leaving raw honesty in its place. Both had glimpsed parts of each other rarely seen by anyone. The servant's courage and selflessness, the master's vulnerability and humanity. These revelations deepened their bond, making denial impossible. Their conversations grew more frequent, less guarded. One afternoon, as the master supervised cleanup efforts, he called the servant aside. "Why did you do it?" he asked abruptly, his tone softer than usual. "You could have died." The servant hesitated, weighing their response carefully. Because I couldn't imagine walking away knowing you were still inside." The admission hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. For the first time, the master allowed himself to fully acknowledge the depth of their connection. "I don't deserve loyalty like yours," he admitted, his voice tinged with awe. "Or bravery. It's not about deserving," the servant countered, surprising even themselves with their boldness. "Sometimes we do things because we can't imagine doing otherwise." This exchange marked a turning point, not just in their relationship, but in how they viewed themselves. The servant realized they were more than the sum of their duties, more than the label society assigned them. And the master, for all his privilege and power, confronted the limitations imposed by his position. Love, it seemed, refused to obey the rules, yet foreshadowing loomed large. While their bond strengthened, external pressures intensified. Rumors spread among the staff about the unusual rapport between the two, whispers growing louder with each passing day. Outsiders visiting the estate noticed subtle shifts. The way the master sought out the servant's opinion, the ease with which they interacted despite their differing stations. Even distant relatives began questioning whether propriety was being upheld. One particularly cutting remark came from a visiting aunt who cornered the master after dinner. "Your father would roll in his grave if he saw how familiar you've become with the help," she hissed, her lips curled into a disdainful sneer. "It's unbecoming, Edward. You must remember your place and theirs." Her words stung, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. Could he truly pursue a future with someone so far removed from his world? What price would they pay for defying societal norms? These questions gnawed at him, threatening to undo the progress they'd made. Meanwhile, the servant wrestled with their own fears. Every glance shared, every word spoken carried the risk of exposure. What if someone discovered their secret? What if their love became public knowledge, subjecting them to ridicule and ruin? Late at night, lying awake in their quarters, they replayed scenarios in their mind, imagining worst-case outcomes. Fear whispered insidiously, "Is it worth it? Can love survive such odds?" Despite these doubts, their undeniable bond continued to grow. Small acts of kindness became symbols of devotion. The master started leaving books on topics outside their usual reading material: history, philosophy, poetry, knowing the servant longed for knowledge denied to them by circumstance. In return, the servant left notes tucked into his coat pocket, snippets of wisdom gleaned from years of observation, reminders that intelligence wasn't confined to classrooms. These gestures weren't grand or dramatic, but they spoke volumes. They represented trust, respect, and a willingness to see each other as equals, even if society refused to do the same. Together, they built a sanctuary within the confines of their oppressive world, carving out moments of authenticity amidst artifice. But complications loomed on the horizon. A letter arrived one morning bearing news of an impending marriage proposal arranged by the master's family. Tradition demanded compliance, duty overshadowing desire. How would he respond? Could he reject such an alliance without sparking scandal? And what of the servant? Would they step aside, sacrificing their happiness for the sake of practicality? Or would they fight for a love deemed impossible? As tensions mounted, viewers watching this unfolding drama might find themselves torn between hope and despair. Would love triumph over adversity, or would fear dictate their fate? One thing was certain: once barriers begin to break, there's no going back. Each choice they made brought them closer to a reckoning, one that promised heartache, revelation, and perhaps redemption. Love, in its purest form, is meant to be freeing, a force that uplifts and unites. But for our master and servant, it was anything but liberating. Instead, their growing affection became a double-edged sword, slicing through the carefully constructed walls of propriety while leaving them vulnerable to pain, judgment, and ruin. As their feelings deepened, so too did the emotional turmoil they faced. Every stolen glance, every whispered word carried the weight of forbidden desire, and with it, the constant threat of discovery. The tension began subtly, almost imperceptibly. It started with fleeting moments of hesitation. The servant would catch themselves lingering outside the master's study longer than necessary, rehearsing mundane updates in their head before knocking on the door. Each time, they wrestled with an internal battle. Should I knock? Should I speak? Or should I retreat back into the shadows where I belong? Similarly, the master found himself pausing mid-sentence during conversations with guests, distracted by the sight of the servant moving gracefully across the room. His thoughts drifted to places they shouldn't, imagining what life might look like without boundaries, without titles dictating every interaction. These hesitations weren't born out of indifference. Quite the opposite. They stemmed from fear, a paralyzing awareness of the stakes involved. If anyone suspected the truth, the consequences would ripple far beyond just them. For the servant, exposure meant losing everything: their livelihood, their reputation, and any chance at a future. Society wouldn't tolerate such audacity, a lowly servant daring to harbor feelings for someone above their station. Gossip would spread like wildfire, branding them as reckless or worse, immoral. Dismissal would follow swiftly, leaving them destitute and ostracized. For the master, the risks were equally daunting, though different in nature. While he wouldn't face physical hardship, his world, the one built on privilege, power, and expectation, would crumble around him. Family ties could sever overnight, alliances dissolve, and his name dragged through the mud. Worse still, he'd become a cautionary tale, proof that even those born into greatness could falter when tempted by base desires. Love, in this context, wasn't just dangerous, it was destructive. Despite these looming threats, denial proved futile. Try as they might to suppress their emotions, they bubbled to the surface in unexpected ways. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, the master sought solace in the library. He sat by the fire, nursing a glass of brandy, when the servant entered to stoke the flames. Their movements were efficient, practiced, but something about the way they avoided eye contact stirred unease within him. "You've been quiet lately," he remarked, breaking the silence. "Is something troubling you?" The servant froze momentarily, poker in hand, before resuming their task. "Nothing worth mentioning, sir," they replied, their voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "Nonsense," he countered gently. "I know you better than that." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The servant turned to face him, their expression guarded yet tinged with longing. "And what exactly do you think you know, sir?" they asked cautiously. "I know." He hesitated, searching for the right phrasing. "But there's more to you than meets the eye. More than anyone gives you credit for, including yourself." A flicker of emotion passed over the servant's features, gratitude, perhaps, mixed with sadness. "It doesn't matter who I am or what I feel," they said softly. Not here. Not in this world. It matters to me, he insisted, his tone firm, yet tender. In that moment, the truth became undeniable. No amount of denial could erase the connection binding them together. Yet acknowledging it brought little relief. Instead, it intensified the ache, transforming vague yearnings into tangible need. They both knew they were playing with fire, yet neither could bring themselves to walk away. Moments like these grew more frequent, each one chipping away at their resolve. There were nights when the servant lay awake, replaying fragments of conversations or recalling the warmth in the master's gaze. Were they imagining things, projecting hopes onto empty gestures? Or was there genuine affection behind his words? Similarly, the master found himself questioning whether his feelings were real or merely a product of loneliness, an escape from the suffocating expectations weighing him down. Denial gave way to acceptance, albeit reluctantly. For the servant, it happened during a rare afternoon off, spent wandering the estate grounds. Spring had arrived, painting the landscape in vibrant hues of green and gold. Birds chirped merrily overhead, and sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the ground. Sitting beneath an ancient oak, they allowed themselves to dream, forbidden dreams of a life where love wasn't shackled by class or circumstance. What would it be like to wake up beside him every morning, to share laughter and sorrows as equals? The fantasy felt achingly beautiful and utterly impossible. For the master, acceptance came later, triggered by an encounter with his father's portrait hanging in the gallery. As he studied the stern face staring back at him, memories flooded his mind. Lessons on duty, honor, sacrifice. His father had lived and died by these principles, expecting nothing less from his heir. But now, standing there surrounded by relics of the past, the master realized he couldn't follow in those footsteps. Not completely. Something, or rather, someone, had changed him fundamentally. Their eventual acceptance of their feelings didn't erase the risks. If anything, it amplified them. With clarity came urgency, a desperate need to protect what they had while grappling with the knowledge that it might never last. Conversations grew bolder, though still cloaked in secrecy. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled outside, the master summoned the servant to his study under the pretense of discussing household accounts. Close the door, he instructed once they were alone. The servant obeyed, heart pounding wildly. What is it, sir? They asked, trying to mask their nervousness. He hesitated, pacing slowly before stopping directly in front of them. Do you ever wonder what it would be like to live without fear of judgment, without hiding who we are? The question caught them off guard, stirring emotions they'd worked so hard to bury. Every day, they admitted quietly, but wondering won't change anything. No, he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. It won't, but pretending hasn't worked either. They stood there, inches apart, the air crackling with unspoken truths. Neither moved, neither spoke, yet volumes passed between them. In that charged silence, they acknowledged the depth of their bond, a bond strong enough to defy logic, but fragile enough to shatter under pressure. Suspense built steadily as external forces closed in. Rumors among the staff grew louder, fueled by observations no one dared voice openly. A maid giggled nervously about how the servant always seemed to appear whenever the master needed something. A footman muttered darkly about favoritism, his tone laced with envy. Even visitors picked up on subtle cues, commenting on the peculiar closeness between employer and employee. One particularly damning incident occurred during a charity ball hosted at the estate. The master, distracted by a heated discussion with a business associate, failed to notice the servant approaching with a tray of refreshments. When their eyes met across the crowded room, something unspoken passed between them, a spark of recognition, a shared secret. Unfortunately, the moment didn't go unnoticed. A sharp-eyed dowager aunt leaned toward her companion, whispering loudly enough for nearby ears to hear. Mark my words, there's something improper going on between those two. Her words sent shock waves through the gathering, planting seeds of doubt in minds already primed for scandal. though no outright accusations followed. At least not immediately. The atmosphere shifted noticeably. Servants exchanged wary glances, guests speculated behind fluttering fans, and the master himself seemed unusually tense. The servant noticed this change immediately, sensing the precariousness of their situation. "What will happen if they find out?" the servant asked one night, unable to contain their anxiety any longer. "We'll deal with it," the master replied, though his confidence wavered. "Together." "But can we?" they pressed, tears welling in their eyes. "Can we really stand against everyone? Against everything?" He reached out, taking their hand in his, a bold, reckless gesture. "If loving you means losing everything else, then so be it." Though heartfelt, his declaration offered little comfort. Both knew the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles, each step fraught with peril. Would society allow them to rewrite the rules? Or would it crush them beneath its unforgiving heel? As viewers watch this chapter unfold, they'll feel the weight of every decision, every glance, every whispered promise. Suspense builds inexorably, drawing them deeper into the story. Will love conquer all, or will fear dictate their fate? One thing remains certain. Once forbidden feelings take root, they cannot be ignored. And in this world of rigid hierarchies and unyielding traditions, love isn't just a choice. It's a rebellion. The tug of war between love and duty is as old as time itself. But for our master and servant, it was more than a philosophical dilemma. It was a battleground where every decision carried monumental consequences. Their personal desires clashed violently with their responsibilities, creating an internal storm that neither could escape. Society's expectations loomed large, casting long shadows over their relationship. Family obligations whispered insidiously in their ears, reminding them of the sacrifices required to uphold tradition. And yet, despite these pressures, their love refused to be extinguished. It burned brighter than ever, illuminating the chasm between what they wanted and what they were expected to do. For the master, duty was woven into the fabric of his existence. From childhood, he had been groomed to lead, to expand the family estate, secure lucrative alliances, and preserve the legacy passed down through generations. His days were dictated by meetings with business associates, consultations with advisors, and strategic planning sessions designed to ensure prosperity. Love wasn't part of this equation. It was seen as secondary, even frivolous. Marriage was a transaction, not a union of hearts. Yet, here he was, entangled in emotions that defied logic and reason. Every glance at the servant stirred feelings he couldn't suppress, forcing him to question everything he'd been taught about honor and responsibility. His internal conflict reached a breaking point one morning when a letter arrived bearing news of an impending visit from his mother. Lady Eleanor, a formidable figure known for her iron will and unyielding adherence to propriety, rarely graced the estate without ulterior motives. This time, however, her purpose was clear: to finalize arrangements for a marriage alliance with the daughter of a wealthy industrialist. The match promised financial security, political influence, and social prestige, all things vital to maintaining the family name. As the master read the letter, a wave of nausea washed over him. He knew what this meant. A deadline had been set, a path chosen for him before he was even born. To refuse would mean rebellion, dishonor, and potentially exile from the very world that defined him. But acquiescence came at an equally steep cost: the loss of the one person who made him feel alive, who saw him not as a title or position, but as a human being capable of vulnerability and passion. Her words struck a nerve, resonating uncomfortably close to the truth. The estate, once a symbol of unity and strength, now felt fractured under the weight of secrets and lies. The master sensed this shift acutely, feeling the walls closing in around him. The servant, too, felt the ground beneath their feet crumbling, unable to ignore the growing tension permeating every corner of the mansion. It all came to a head one fateful evening, a confrontation that would test the limits of their resolve. Lady Eleanor had arrived earlier that day, her presence immediately altering the atmosphere of the estate. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, her pointed questions probing deeper than anyone dare challenge. By dinner, the air was thick with anticipation, everyone bracing for the inevitable showdown. After the meal, the master requested a private audience with his mother in the drawing room. The servant lingered outside, eavesdropping despite themselves, unable to resist the urge to hear what fate awaited them both. Inside, the conversation began cordially enough, with pleasantries exchanged and tea poured. But soon, Lady Eleanor cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Edward, darling," she began, her tone deceptively sweet, "I've heard some unsettling rumors recently about you and one of the servants." The master stiffened visibly, though his expression remained neutral. "Rumors, mother? Surely you don't put much stock in idle gossip." "Oh, I don't," she replied smoothly, sipping her tea. "But idle gossip often has roots in truth. Tell me, Edward, have you grown overly fond of someone in your employ?" He hesitated, weighing his response carefully. Denial seemed futile. She already suspected something. Instead, he chose honesty tempered with caution. "If you're asking whether I value those who serve me, then yes, of course. Loyalty deserves recognition." Lady Eleanor set her cup down with a deliberate clink. "Don't play coy with me, boy. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Do you imagine I haven't seen the way you look at that young man, or woman, whoever they are? The way you seek excuses to keep them close? Need I remind you of your responsibilities? Of the legacy you're meant to uphold?" Her words landed like daggers, piercing through his defenses. "I understand my duties, mother," he said tightly. "But must I sacrifice my happiness entirely for the sake of appearances?" "Happiness is fleeting," she snapped, her composure slipping. "Duty endures. Your father understood that. He gave up countless pleasures for the sake of this family, and so must you." The mention of his father ignited a spark of defiance within him. Father lived a life dictated by others' expectations. Is that truly the example I should follow? "You ungrateful child!" she exclaimed, rising from her seat. "Do you think you can rewrite centuries of tradition because of some foolish infatuation? If you persist in this madness, you'll destroy everything we've built." Their voices carried through the door, reaching the servants' ears. Each word felt like a blade slicing through their chest. They wanted to burst into the room, to defend the master, to scream that they loved him too, but doing so would only make matters worse. Instead, they pressed their back against the wall, tears streaming silently down their face. Inside, the argument escalated further. "So be it," the master said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "If loving them means losing everything else, then so be it." Lady Eleanor stared at him, disbelief etched across her features. "You'll regret this," she warned coldly. "When society turns its back on you, when friends become enemies and allies desert you, don't come crawling to me for help." With that, she swept out of the room, leaving the master alone with his thoughts. He sank into a chair, head in his hands, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he'd just done. Outside, the servant slid to the floor, trembling with a mix of relief and terror. The die had been cast, but at what cost? As viewers watch this scene unfold, they'll feel the tension mounting, the stakes higher than ever. Will the master's declaration hold firm, or will fear drive him to reconsider? Can the servant endure the fallout of such bold defiance? The chapter ends with a haunting image, the two standing apart, separated by the vast gulf of societal expectations, yet bound together by a love too powerful to deny. But the story doesn't stop there. As the screen fades to black, faint whispers echo in the background. Servants murmuring, guests speculating, Lady Eleanor plotting her next move. A single question lingers, unanswered. What happens now? When love is forbidden, every decision becomes a sacrifice. For the master and the servant, the aftermath of their confrontation with societal expectations thrust them into uncharted territory, a place where staying together meant risking everything, while parting ways offered no guarantee of peace. Each choice they made carried weight, not just for themselves, but for the fragile bond they had fought so hard to build. This chapter delves into the heart-wrenching dilemmas they faced, the sacrifices they considered, and the ultimate decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. The days following Lady Eleanor's visit were fraught with tension. The air in the estate felt heavier, charged with an undercurrent of unease. Servants tiptoed around the master, sensing his brooding mood, while guests exchanged knowing glances, speculating about the rift between mother and son. Meanwhile, the servant wrestled with their own turmoil, torn between hope and despair. Every interaction between them now carried the risk of exposure, yet neither could bring themselves to retreat completely. Their connection was too deep, too vital, to sever without consequence for the servant. The first seed of doubt took root during a quiet moment in the kitchen. As they chopped vegetables for dinner, another maid approached, her tone casual but probing. "You've been spending quite a bit of time upstairs lately," she remarked, leaning against the counter. "Is there something going on we should know about?" The question caught them off guard, forcing a nervous laugh. "Just doing my job," they replied, avoiding eye contact. But the comment lingered, gnawing at their confidence. They couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching, ears listening, waiting for any misstep that might confirm suspicions. That night, lying awake in their cramped quarters, they replayed the conversation in their mind, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if someone discovered the truth? What if their presence became a liability, not just for themselves, but for the master? These fears crystallized into a painful realization. Perhaps the most selfless act they could perform was to leave, to walk away before things spiraled further out of control. It wasn't a new thought. Leaving had always been an option, but now it seemed inevitable. How could they justify staying when doing so endangered the very person they loved? Yet, even as the idea formed, resistance bubbled within them. Could they truly abandon the master after all they'd shared? After all he'd done to protect them? Meanwhile, the master grappled with his own internal battle. His defiance of Lady Eleanor had been bold, even reckless, but it came at a cost. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers among the staff and guests. Business associates began distancing themselves, citing concerns over scandal. Even longtime friends hesitated to engage, wary of associating with someone whose reputation hung precariously in the balance. The once stable foundation of his life crumbled beneath him, leaving him questioning whether his declaration of love had been worth the price. Yet, despite these mounting pressures, he refused to waver. Love, he realized, wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It was a commitment, one that demanded action. He found himself revisiting memories of their shared moments, each one reinforcing his resolve. The way the servant had saved him during the fire, the quiet strength they displayed in the face of adversity, the unspoken understanding that passed between them in crowded rooms. These fragments of their relationship painted a picture far richer than anything society could offer. If losing everything else meant keeping this love alive, then so be it. Their conflicting emotions collided in a pivotal scene late one evening when the master summoned the servant to his study. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the walls as rain pattered softly against the windows. Neither spoke immediately. Instead, they stood facing each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily between them. "I've been thinking," the servant began haltingly, breaking the silence. "About us. About what happens next." The master nodded, his expression unreadable. "Go on. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything," they continued, their voice trembling. "Your family, your legacy, it's who you are. And they paused, swallowing hard. "I'm nothing compared to that." "That's not true," he interjected firmly. "You're everything to me." "But at what cost?" they countered, tears welling in their eyes. "Look at what's happening around us. People are talking, turning against you. Your mother won't stop until she destroys whatever chance we have. Is it really worth it? We're throwing away everything you've worked for." He stepped closer, closing the gap between them. "If loving you means losing everything else, then yes, it's worth it. Because without you, none of it matters." His words struck a chord, stirring emotions they tried to suppress. "But what about tomorrow?" they asked, desperation creeping into their voice. "What happens when the gossip turns into accusations? When your name is dragged through the mud? When they take everything from you and me?" "I'll fight for us," he vowed, his tone unwavering. "No matter what it takes." The servant shook their head, tears spilling down their cheeks. "And if I ask you to let me go? To save yourself?" He hesitated, searching their face for answers. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but resolute. "Then I'll respect your wishes. But know this, I'll never stop loving you. Not even if the world tries to tear us apart." The gravity of the moment settled over them, raw and undeniable. Both understood the stakes. One final decision awaited, one that would determine their future. Would the servant choose to stay, embracing the chaos and uncertainty ahead? Or would they leave, sacrificing their happiness for the sake of practicality? And if they left, could the master truly move forward alone? The answer came unexpectedly, triggered by an event neither saw coming. A letter arrived the following morning, addressed to the master. Its contents sent shockwaves through the estate. Lady Eleanor had arranged a formal engagement ceremony with the industrialist's daughter, set to take place within weeks. Worse still, she'd issued an ultimatum. If the master refused to comply, she would cut him off entirely, stripping him of his inheritance and title. The news hit like a thunderclap, forcing both characters to confront the reality of their situation. For the servant, it confirmed their worst fears. Their presence was becoming untenable. Staying would only make things worse, dragging the master deeper into ruin. For the master, it underscored the depth of his mother's determination and the enormity of the challenge ahead. In a climactic moment, they met in the garden, surrounded by the beauty of spring blossoms. The contrast between the vibrant landscape and their somber expressions was stark, almost poetic. Neither spoke immediately, allowing the significance of the moment to sink in. "I've made my decision," the servant said finally, their voice steady despite the storm raging within. "I'm leaving." The master froze, disbelief etched across his features. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "You can't." "I have to," they replied, tears streaming down their face. "It's the only way to protect you, to give you a chance at a life without me." "But I don't want a life without you," he pleaded, reaching for their hand. "Please don't do this." "I'm doing it because I love you," they insisted, pulling away gently. "Because I can't bear the thought of ruining everything you've worked for. You deserve better than this, better than me." The pain in his eyes mirrored their own anguish. "Don't decide for me," he begged. "Let me fight for us, together." They shook their head, steeling themselves against the urge to relent. Sometimes, love means letting go, even when it hurts. With those final words, they turned and walked away, leaving the master standing amidst the flowers, shattered and alone. The screen fades to black as his anguished cry echoes faintly in the distance. Every journey reaches its destination, but not every story ends with a tidy bow. For the master and the servant, their resolution was both inevitable and unpredictable, a culmination of sacrifices, choices, and the relentless pull of love against insurmountable odds. As this chapter unfolds, viewers will witness how their struggles shape them individually and as a pair, leading to an ending that feels earned, even if it isn't perfect. Love doesn't always conquer all, at least, not in the ways we expect, but it leaves an indelible mark on those who dare to embrace it. The days following the servant's departure were among the darkest the master had ever known. The estate, once bustling with activity, now felt eerily silent. Servants tiptoed around him, sensing his despair, while guests avoided visiting altogether, deterred by rumors of scandal and estrangement. Lady Eleanor watched from afar, her expression smug yet tinged with satisfaction. She believed she'd won, that her son would finally yield to tradition and duty. But what she didn't realize was that the fire within him still burned, diminished perhaps, but far from extinguished for the servant. Leaving hadn't brought the peace they'd hoped for. They found temporary work in a neighboring town, performing menial tasks for strangers who barely acknowledged their presence. Each night, lying on a thin mattress in a drafty attic room, they replayed memories of the estate in vivid detail. The crackling fireplace in the library, the scent of rain-soaked gardens, the warmth of the master's gaze. Painful as these recollections were, they refused to let go entirely, clinging to the belief that their sacrifice had been necessary. Yet doubt lingered, whispering cruelly in the quiet hours. Was it enough? Did I do the right thing? Despite their physical separation, neither could escape the bond they shared. It wasn't just memory or longing, it was something deeper, more profound. Over time, small signs began to emerge, hinting at the possibility of reconciliation. One such sign came unexpectedly during a visit to the local market. The servant, picking through apples at a vendor's stall, overheard familiar voices discussing recent events at the estate. Curiosity got the better of them, and they listened intently as townsfolk speculated about the master's behavior. Heard he's gone mad, one woman whispered conspiratorially. Refuses to attend social gatherings, won't speak to his mother, spends hours wandering the ground alone. Another chimed in, shaking her head. It's tragic, really. Such a promising young man. Throwing it all away for, well, no one knows exactly why. Their words struck a chord, stirring emotions the servant thought they'd buried. Could it be true? Had their absence truly broken him? Guilt mingled with hope, urging them to act. But how? Returning to the estate seemed impossible. Too much had changed, too many bridges burned. Still, the idea took root, growing stronger with each passing day. Meanwhile, the master embarked on his own path of reflection. He withdrew from society entirely, retreating in his solitude as he grappled with the magnitude of his loss. Days turned into weeks, then months, during which he wandered the estate like a ghost, haunted by memories of the person who had once filled its halls with light. He revisited places they'd shared, the garden where they'd exchanged stolen glances, the study where they'd debated philosophy, the kitchen where laughter had bubbled amid mundane chores. Each location carried echoes of their connection, reminding him of what he'd given up and what he might still reclaim. Point one evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, he sat by the lake at the edge of the property. The water shimmered softly, reflecting the fading sunlight, and for the first time in months, clarity washed over him. He realized that love wasn't confined to proximity or circumstance. It transcended boundaries, defying logic and reason. If the servant had chosen to leave out of love, then it was only fitting that he honor their decision by fighting for them, not against society, but alongside them. With renewed determination, he penned a letter, a simple yet heartfelt plea inviting the servant to meet him at a neutral location, free from judgment or interference. There was no guarantee they'd come, but he owed it to himself and to them to try. When the servant received the letter, their initial reaction was disbelief. Could it really be him? After so long, after everything that had happened? Doubt warred with curiosity, but ultimately, the pull of unfinished business proved irresistible. They agreed to meet, choosing a secluded park on the outskirts of town, a place neither associated with their past lives. The reunion was fraught with tension, each step toward each other laden with uncertainty. When they finally stood face to face, neither spoke immediately, allowing the weight of their shared history to settle between them. Finally, the master broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." The servant shook their head, tears welling in their eyes. "You have nothing to apologize for. I made my choice. And I made mine," he countered gently, "to keep fighting for us." They hesitated, searching his face for answers. "But what does that mean? Where do we go from here?" He reached out, taking their hand in his, a gesture both bold and tender. "I don't know. Maybe there's no happily ever after waiting for people like us. But I do know this. I can't imagine a future without you in it. Whatever happens next, let's face it together." His words resonated deeply, unlocking something within them. Perhaps happiness wouldn't come easily, or at all, but the mere act of trying, of refusing to surrender entirely, held power. Together, they began crafting a new path, one defined not by societal expectations, but by mutual respect, trust, and unwavering commitment. As viewers watch this resolution unfold, they'll find themselves reflecting on the themes explored throughout the story: love, sacrifice, resilience, and the courage to defy convention. The ending may not provide all the answers. It leaves room for interpretation, encouraging audiences to consider what they value most in life. Is it wealth and status, or connection and authenticity? Can love truly overcome barriers, or does it simply transform them? Ultimately, the master and the servant prove that while circumstances shape our journeys, they don't define us. Their story is one of growth, transformation, and the enduring power of human connection. Though their future remains uncertain, one truth stands clear. They've come farther than either thought possible, emerging stronger, not because of the world around them, but in spite of it. As we bring this story to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on the journey we've shared, a tale of forbidden love, resilience, and the courage to defy societal boundaries. At its core, this narrative is about two individuals who dared to challenge the rigid structures of their world, choosing instead to follow their hearts despite overwhelming odds. Their struggles remind us that love isn't always easy or convenient. It often demands sacrifice, patience, and an unshakable belief in something greater than ourselves. Throughout the chapters, we witnessed how deeply ingrained hierarchies shaped every aspect of life for both the master and the servant. Society dictated not only their roles but also their identities, leaving little room for personal desires or authentic connections. Yet, even within these constraints, they found ways to see each other as equals, human beings bound by shared experiences, vulnerabilities, and dreams. This shift didn't happen overnight. It was built through small, meaningful moments: a lingering glance, a whispered word of gratitude, an act of bravery during a crisis. These fragments of connection became the foundation of their relationship, proving that love can flourish in the most unlikely places if given the chance. One of the key takeaways from this story is the transformative power of empathy. Both characters grew significantly over time, learning to step outside themselves and consider the other's perspective. The master came to understand the weight of responsibility carried by those beneath him, while the servant discovered inner strength they never knew they possessed. Together, they demonstrated that true equality doesn't stem from titles or wealth, but from mutual respect and understanding. In doing so, they challenged not only the norms of their society, but also our own assumptions about what defines worth and value. Another important theme is the idea of sacrifice, not as a sign of weakness, but as an expression of profound love. When the servant chose to leave, it wasn't out of indifference, but because they believed letting go was the only way to protect the person they loved. Similarly, the master's decision to fight for their relationship, even when faced with loss and rejection, showed that some bonds are worth preserving no matter the cost. Their choices remind us that love isn't just about holding on. Sometimes it's about making space for growth, healing, and new possibilities. Ultimately, this story leaves us with a powerful message. Barriers exist everywhere, in relationships, careers, dreams, but breaking them requires more than just desire. It takes courage to question the status quo, to stand up against judgment, and to embrace vulnerability. Love, in particular, has a unique ability to transcend divisions, reminding us of our shared humanity. Whether it leads to happiness or heartache, the act of loving boldly changes us forever, teaching lessons about resilience, self-discovery, and the importance of staying true to oneself. As viewers, you've traveled alongside these characters, experiencing their highs and lows, triumphs and setbacks. You've seen firsthand how far they've come individually and, as a couple, emerging stronger despite the challenges they faced. Their story may be fictional, but its themes resonate universally. Who among us hasn't grappled with fear, doubt, or societal pressure at some point? Who hasn't yearned for connection, acceptance, or the freedom to live authentically? By sharing their journey, we hope to inspire you to reflect on your own path, to ask yourself where you might find the courage to break free from limitations and pursue what truly matters. Before we part ways, we want to thank you, our amazing audience, for joining us on this emotional roller coaster. Your support means everything to us, and it's what keeps us motivated to create stories like this one. If you enjoyed this video, please give a thumbs up and share it with others who might appreciate it. Drop a comment below telling us what resonated with you most. Was it the characters' sacrifices, their determination, or perhaps the reminder that love can overcome even the toughest barriers? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future uploads. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you gripping tales that blend drama, history, and universal truths, leaving you inspired, informed, and entertained. Every subscription helps us continue creating content that sparks conversation and touches hearts. Finally, as we wrap up, we leave you with this thought. Love, in all its forms, is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. It challenges us, heals us, and transforms us in ways we could never predict. But above all, it reminds us that no barrier, not class, tradition, or expectation, is insurmountable when fueled by genuine connection and unwavering courage. So, whatever barriers you face in your own life, remember, there's always a way forward. Sometimes, all it takes is the willingness to take that first step. Thank you again for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love and the strength within yourself to rewrite the script of your life.